Hello and welcome. I'm Margaret Johnson with TDI3, and it's my pleasure to have you with me today for KPIs that work, one of our decision building block sessions. I'm pleased to be seeing folks from all over the world on the session this morning, including, I believe, our first ever attendee from Armenia, so welcome to you all. We have a lot to cover in 30 minutes, and what I'm going to show you and share with you today is this basic premise that key performance indicators are the decoder ring, if you will, for organizational decision making. And we're going to talk about how key performance indicators relate to decision making and what changes we might be able to make in our organizations so that we can get a finer point on decision making as it relates to what we actually want to achieve. Now, what you're going to hear is a 30 minutes of what is really a full day workshop that typically is done with organizations, with executive teams, etc. And there are some areas where more detail might be called for, and we can certainly do that in a different session. There are also some areas we're going to touch on where there's a lot of angst in the academic community about certain phrases and things, and I'll point those out when we get to them, but we're not going to go deep into some of that anxiety, and you'll see what I mean when we get there. So let's get started by talking about what you're going to be able to do when we finish. By the end of our time, you're going to be ready to look at your decision-making process, critically look at your organization's KPIs, ask yourself whether they're KPIs or whether they're LIs, which are either leading indicators or lagging indicators, and to really think about your KPI chain. One of the concepts that you'll hear this morning is the concept of worthwhile work. And I have found this over the course of my career and in the course of work I've done with other companies to be absolutely critical to organizational success. And you'll see what I mean by that in just a moment. So let's start with defining what KPIs really are. And this is an area where things are fairly unified across academia and corporate and organizations, is that they are quantifiable measurements. So KPIs can't be fuzzy, and that's something we'll get into here. They need to be quantifiable measurements that A, let the organization know if it's achieving its goals, and B, provide guidance to all team members. And I've happened upon this particular quote. The role of KPIs is to provide the required information to assist in navigating to the desired results. Now, you might see them also referred to as key success indicators or key performance measures, but typically KPI is the term. Where do KPIs fit? Well, here's where we're going to hit on a couple of those terms here that I mentioned are fairly contentious in the world of pundits and writers, etc. But we'll get through this, and you'll understand what I mean. Basically, what I want to leave you with here is it doesn't matter what definition you choose of some of these things, as long as everyone in your organization agrees to that same definition. So the first step in organizational planning is the strategic plan, and that is what defines success. We then have the goals, objectives, and critical success factors, and this is the area where things get fuzzy. A lot of times people use goals and objectives interchangeably. They might throw critical success factors in there interchangeably as well. You can get extremely detailed with dividing these out. Personally, I'm all for simplicity, because part of the point here is that we're creating something that we can communicate downstream to every single team member. And when we get, oh, that's a goal, that's an objective, that's a CSF, that can get a little confusing. So keep it simple and think of this layer as what causes success. So you defined success in your strategic plan. Now you're going to talk about what are the things that cause that success to occur. From there, we now make decisions. What is going to get done that will cause success so that we achieve the success that we defined in the strategic plan. And if you could see my hands, you could see I'm doing kind of a build motion with my hands right now, and I'm saying these all build up to each other. So the what gets done contributes to the causes of success, which then allows us to achieve success as we've defined it. And under what gets done is the critical step of how it gets done. What are the actions that we'll take? What are the influences that act on our actions and on our decisions? And how do those all interrelate to, again, allow us to achieve the success that we've defined? If you've sat in one of my webinars before, you know that I talk a lot about influences and actions. And in case you haven't, I just want to say that the influences are the things that we can measure, but we cannot control. So an influence might be a competitor pricing, could be market wages, market salaries, could be a market bill rate for a professional services firm. We can measure those things, but we don't have control over them. Whereas actions are the things that we can do, we can measure, and we can control. And those flow in, both interact with all of the decisions that we make. But where do KPIs fit in? Well, they fit right here in the middle. Key performance indicators are the things that measure the effect of what's getting done and how things are getting done so that we can know if we're able to achieve the goals, objectives, critical success factors, and ultimately can we achieve what we have defined as success. That's where that decoder ring comes in. It decodes the causes of success through a measurable filter into the decisions that we make. Likewise, the decisions that we make are decoded through that same filter to understand how they're going to impact what it is that we're trying to achieve. Hopefully that makes sense. I am a huge believer in charting things out in this kind of format, and I'll show you what I mean. So the KPI chain is how we start charting those things out. And as you can see, I've started at the top with the one key measure. And I think the first time I read about the one key measure, I was actually reading Good to Great by Jim Collins. And famously, Walgreens in that book was shown as an example of how shifting and more finely tuning the one key measure made a huge difference to how they did business. And if I recall correctly, their prior key measure was something on the order of same-store sales. And we see that a lot in retail. We see it in restaurants. What are same-store sales? And that becomes the measure that that the analysts look at from the stock market and on and up, onward and onward. Walgreens changed their key measure to be revenue per customer visit. And when they did that, they got a whole different lens on their organization, and that is the point at which they started building stores on every corner here in the United States. For those outside the United States, Walgreens is a big drugstore chain here in the U.S. But I also think about this as, you know, in the restaurant business. I've been really intrigued by some of the things going on in the restaurant business lately. I did a blog post a while back about how Red Lobster was sold, which is obviously a seafood restaurant chain in the casual dining category. And I found myself wondering if instead of the key measure of same-store sales, which is what they typically use, if they were to use a revenue marker called revenue per seat, and how that might change things for them. That's another story, but kind of an interesting one, and if you want to reach out to me, I'd be happy to share my thoughts on that. But I'm really intrigued with the one key measure, and I think it has incredible value. If you can really fine-tune and understand the one metric that lets you know if you're successful or not, That is absolutely key, and that forms the top of this pyramid. In a professional services organization, it might be revenue per team member. When you establish a metric that is revenue per team member should be X. If you find yourself going above it, that's a win. If you find yourself going below it, it might be an indicator that you've become too top-heavy. You've added too many non-billing resources, as an example. So that one key measure is critical. Under the one key measure are the organizational KPIs. The organizational KPIs are the measurements that you're going to use to know if you are achieving success in the organization. Do you have a shot at achieving your goals, objectives, critical success factors? Those organizational KPIs are absolutely critical because they're going to drive the activities of everyone else. Again, all of these things build on each other. And as we build, we not only create a KPI chain, we create a KPI chain that is translated all the way down to every team member in the organization. Organizational KPIs are absolutely critical, and they are a very obvious place to get very muddled up. And I'll explain that in just a moment. Think of this, however. The organizational KPIs support that one key measure. So they may be leading indicators of whether or not the one key measure is going to be achieved. When we look at then building down, the departmental or group KPIs are typically the KPIs that, well, obviously they're for the department or the group, but they also become, in many cases, the leading indicators for the organizational KPIs. An example would be that organizational KPI might be revenue. A sales team's KPI might be closed sales. Well, closed sales is a great KPI for a sales team, but it's a terrible KPI for an organization because it doesn't matter if you close a sale, you have to be able to bill the sale and collect the money. So that departmental KPI becomes a leading indicator of whether or not we're going to achieve the organizational KPI. And then finally, down here at the bottom, the base, the foundation, because I don't want to make this seem less than it is. This is absolutely critical, the individual metrics. And individual metrics tie all the way back up the pyramid, and they form the foundation for the achievement of success. The term worthwhile work is one that I got from a fellow named Ken Blanchard a number of years ago. He wrote a book called Gung Ho, and in Gung Ho they talk about how everyone in an organization needs to understand that the work they're doing is worthwhile. So let me give you an example of what I mean by worthwhile work. Let's go back to the restaurant chain. Maybe some of you on the call today actually have worked in restaurants, and maybe you were even a dishwasher. And dishwashers in restaurants, they're typically paid very little. They have a big job to do, but a lot of times they don't really understand how the job that they do impacts the entire organization. In many ways, the dishwasher in a restaurant is the most important job there is because they're sanitizing the dishes. They're making sure that things are clean. They are keeping their patrons from being sick. They are, if the dishes are clean, you're less likely to have to offer discounts because of dirty dishes or dirty silverware. I actually had that happen to me not long ago where I actually got a piece of dirty silverware and didn't realize it till after I'd taken a bite. So the manager of the restaurant ended up giving me a discount on my meal. And he wouldn't have had to do that if the dishwasher clearly understood that how worthwhile the work that he was doing is and how it contributes to the achievement of success for the entire organization. So working back up the chain, those individual metrics provide guidance. What decisions do I make? And how do I impact success? At the departmental level, what decisions do we make and how do we impact success? At the organization level, what decisions do we make and are we achieving success? And then finally, that one key measure tells us whether or not we are successful. This is an organizational construct for KPIs that works really well, but there are a few things on which it pivots. First of all, we need to not fall into KPI traps. And these have quote marks around them because we hear them over and over and over again. What gets measured gets managed, and similarly, people respect what you inspect. Well, when we measure lots and lots of things because we want to manage lots and lots of things, we end up getting very confused. It ends up with a big ball of twine. People do not clearly understand what it is they're supposed to do if everything they're doing is being measured and inspected. A great example of this is sales. I have seen sales managers who want to see call reports on a daily basis. They want number of outbound calls, number of emails sent, how many appointments are there, and they're measuring the minutia of the sales team. When in reality, all we really care about, and certainly feel free to correct me if I'm wrong here, but all we really care about is how much they're selling. Are they closing business? If they're not closing business, then sure, go ahead and inspect some of those details. But if they are closing business, do you really need your best salesperson filling out a call report on a daily basis or a weekly basis? Probably not. And what happens in some of those situations is people end up living for the reports instead of living for the action. Everything we can measure is a KPI. Well, that's not really true. Everything we can measure is a metric, yes. Some of the things that we can measure are leading indicators or lagging indicators, and others will be KPIs. A lagging indicator is what happened. How much business did we close last month? How many calls did we make last week? Those are lagging indicators. Leading indicators are indicators of things that if we do this, then this other thing will happen. So a great example is if closed sales is the sales team's KPI, the weighted pipeline might be a leading indicator, well, actually is a leading indicator of whether or not we're going to achieve closed sales. If you have a closed sales metric of $10 million and your weighted pipeline is $2 million, your leading indicator of weighted pipeline tells you that you're not going to achieve your target. That's what a leading indicator is. And leading indicators are absolutely critical to KPIs. Key performance indicators, however, as we'll go into specifically in a moment, have some very distinct characteristics that are critical. And another KPI trap, and this one just kills me, is only management needs to know the KPIs. Well, as I said, this kills me. If people don't understand what the key performance indicators are that they're trying to achieve, how do they know what to do? Very simple. I have presented on KPIs to business leaders all over the country, and when I have asked, do you know what your organization's KPIs are? 95% of the people in those audiences over the course of several years, 95% of them have said, no, I don't. And these are not bottom of the pyramid people. These are mid-level managers, directors, and in some cases a couple of C-level people did not know what the organization's KPIs are. Well, if you don't know what the KPIs are, again, how do you know what to do? Well, KPIs also have some quandaries associated with them. Too many KPIs. Back to that everything we can measure is a KPI idea. No, not really the case. Statistically, if you have one or two KPIs, you might achieve one or two KPIs. If you have 4 or 5 KPIs, you might achieve 4 or 5 KPIs, but if you have 10 KPIs, you might achieve 1 or 2 of them. And if you have more than 10 KPIs, you might achieve none of them. It's critical that we limit the number of KPIs we have and we understand exactly what they are. I've seen organizations structure competing KPIs, and that typically happens when they aren't really KPIs. They're actually leading indicators. But at the corporate level, if you're going to put closed sales, for example, as a corporate KPI, and you're also going to have build revenue as a corporate KPI, those two things can compete with each other, and you end up with the sales leader fighting with the rest of the team saying, I achieved close, mine's done. Well, actually closed sales is a leading indicator for build revenue and probably an appropriate departmental KPI for the sales team, but not really appropriate for a corporate KPI. Confusing KPIs. This, I worked with one management team where I heard someone who'd been sitting on the team for years saying one of our KPIs is operating contribution margin, and every time it comes up I have to remind myself of how it's defined. And the calculation is very confusing, and every time the team gets together we talk about, now is that an above the line thing or a below the line thing? Well, if KPIs are confusing, then you can't socialize them and you can't get the organizational support for them, and more importantly, you can't make decisions based on that KPI. Confusing KPIs are terrible. Unmeasurable KPIs is another thing that I see a lot. Our KPI is to be the best customer service organization in the world. Well, that's not a KPI. It's not measurable. It's not quantitative. Our KPI is to have the most satisfied employees. Again, not measurable, not quantitative. Qualitative indicators are important, but they are not KPIs. KPIs need to be measurable. In fact, when you're looking at KPIs, you can use the SMART metric: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bounded. Or attainable could also be action-oriented, depending on which school of thought you're in, right? And use that SMART mnemonic to structure KPIs. Undefined or ill-defined KPIs. Everybody needs to agree on what a term means. So that operating contribution margin, for example, was poorly defined. People didn't understand it. But you can even have something as simple as closed sales. If it's not well defined, then it's very difficult to socialize and move that KPI into an action-oriented state. So closed sales to one department might mean the customer signed, to another department it might mean the work has begun, or the order is shipped, etc. You see what I mean? Uncommunicated KPIs. If we're not talking about the KPIs to the entire organization in terms they can understand, KPIs aren't going to do us much good. And finally, misplaced KPIs. And this is going back to is it a leading indicator, a lagging indicator, or a true KPI? KPIs have certain characteristics, and those characteristics will help you determine if they are leading or lagging indicators. And here are the characteristics. Each KPI has the objective or goal that it's impacting, a specific definition, measurement, and, oh, by the way, what is the source of that measurement? What is the authoritative data that gives us that measurement? I've seen sales organizations report on their KPIs based on a CRM system, but a CRM system is not necessarily as accurate as we might want it to be, right? So, but if we're going to report from CRM, everybody needs to understand not only how we're reporting, but what we're reporting and where the fallacies may be. For example, Salesman closes a deal, closes the deal in CRM, reports the deal, and then 3 days later the deal gets canceled. How do we deal with that? And how does that impact that measurement and that source? What is the target for that KPI? Is it, growth, 2.4% growth? Is it close sales of X million dollars a month, a year, whatever? What is that target? What are the leading indicators of whether or not we can achieve it? So again, in the sales department, for example, if closed sales is one of their KPIs, a leading indicator might be their historical win ratio against the weighted pipeline. It might be their average deal size. A leading indicator of sales success might be how many appointments they have or how many outbound calls they have. And finally, the internal influences or the decisions that impact the achievement of the KPI, the levers. So if I see that I'm not achieving my KPI, what levers can I pull and push to help me get to a point where I am achieving that KPI? So I see that we're getting close on time, so I want to pull this all together for you and share with you once again that this decoder ring is very, very important. Decisions made impact achievement. And KPIs create a matrix by which decisions are made. So let me just go back. Okay, that's taking longer. There we go. Go back to this triangle here. The departmental and group KPIs weave together. And so this is important. They interact on each other to allow us to fulfill the organizational KPIs. So think about, again, in a professional services organization, sales team might have closed sales. The delivery team, the people who are delivering the professional services, might have billed hours. Excuse me. Well, those two things interact together to allow us to achieve revenue, which is the corporate KPI. So back to if KPIs aren't widely socialized and accepted, decisions could adversely impact success. So if we don't understand what we're driving for, you could have, for example, in prior webinars I've talked about how customer service can blow it out of the water by giving every customer a Ferrari or mailing every customer a check for $100,000. Well, that's going to create a great customer satisfaction score, but it's going to adversely impact everything else. And if we don't understand that profit or revenue or revenue per team member are those KPIs, then we can make a decision in isolation that impacts everything else. And if every person on the team doesn't understand how they contribute and how they benefit by contributing, individual performance is always going to trump organizational success. What's in it for me is a real thing, and people do need to understand what's in it for me, but they need to understand what's in it for me if the organization achieves and I achieve. And this actually can not only form a framework for decision making, it can also form a framework for performance management and a framework for performance management and compensation. So this is huge. And as I said, this is a much longer workshop in real life, but I hope today that I've given you enough to take some action. And ask yourselves these questions. Do you know your organization's KPIs? Now, I know we have some organizational leaders in the session today, but I know that we also have some team members, some people who are not at the C-level. So do you know the organization's KPIs? Do your team members know those KPIs? Do you know how decisions impact achievement of the KPI targets, and do your team members know that? Use KPIs to guide decisions. Follow the why decide chain that we've talked about before. When you're looking at a decision, follow that why. Keep asking yourself why until you land on a departmental KPI, And again, in a properly structured KPI chain, you land on a departmental KPI, then you're going to achieve an organizational KPI and you'll achieve your one key measure. And finally, put this into action. We can help you with that if you like, but I hope I've given you enough to really think about how KPIs are, in fact, the decoder ring, as it were, to decision making, and how they form that compass that let you know if you're doing the right things, and how you can create a portfolio of actions that allow you to achieve success. For more information, you can reach me at mj@tdi3.com. This webinar has been recorded and will be up on our website under the Learn tab, hopefully later today if there haven't been any issues with it. And I welcome you to follow us on Twitter as well. Again, thank you for joining me. I very much appreciate your kind attention, and I'll let you get back to the rest of your day. Have a great one, folks. Thanks so much.